All right, welcome back, everyone, for part two of our deep dive into modern Indian history. Specifically for those of you out there who are UPSC aspirants, especially those tackling that GS1 Modern History section.
It's gonna be a deep one.
It is. This can be a deep one. But honestly, anyone who's just interested in this era, I think you'll find it fascinating.
Mhm.
Today, we're really going to try to go beyond just memorizing names and dates. We're going to get to the WHY behind some of these pivotal movements.
The socio-religious movements of 19th century India.
Exactly, exactly. And if you find this helpful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like the episode or like the deep dive I get.
Deep dive, yeah.
It really does help others discover this content.
Yeah.
So, our source material is a little bit academic.
It is a little dense.
It is a little dense,
But
but don't worry, we're going to break it down into hopefully clear and insightful takeaways.
bite-sized pieces.
Bite-sized pieces for you. Let's set the scene first, okay? Imagine 19th century India under British rule. All those social hierarchies, existing problems within Indian society itself. All this yearning for change kind of simmering beneath the surface.
Right.
Right. And, it's really important to understand first that the Indian social system of the time had its own flaws.
Oh, absolutely. There were some inherent issues that we need to address.
Absolutely.
We're talking about rigid religious beliefs, a very, very particularly grim situation for women at the time.
Yeah.
Practices like female infanticide, child marriage, polygamy, and sati, they were prevalent. It was a complex time.
It was a complex time and really, to say the least, challenging.
Challenging, yes.
Yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting. The British, right? They were driven by their ambitions, their colonial ambitions, of course. But inadvertently, they became catalysts for change.
How so?
Because they brought with them ideas. Ideas like liberty and equality and justice.
Whether they intended to or not, these ideas took root.
Exactly. And those concepts, they probably were serving British interests, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But they did spark a social awakening among Indians.
It's like a seed.
It is, right.
Planted in fertile ground, ready to grow.
Exactly. Exactly. So to really understand the why behind all of these movements that started popping up, we have to kind of unpack the forces that propelled them forward.
Okay.
Right? And it wasn't just a single catalyst, was it? I mean, colonial influence was significant, but it wasn't the only factor.
Oh, no, absolutely not. I mean, the introduction of English education and Western ideals, they created a whole new generation of Indians who started to question the traditional norms. But on top of that, you have increased access to education, which exposed Indians to what was going on around the world.
Yeah.
The rise of nationalism globally.
Right.
The spread of democratic ideas. I mean, it just broadened their horizons.
Yeah.
And it fueled this desire for change within India.
So it's like internal and external forces all kind of...
It's a confluence of factors all feeding into each other.
Exactly. And something that I think often gets overlooked is the rediscovery of India's own past.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. During this time, you had European and Indian scholars
all digging deep,
delving into those ancient Indian texts, unearthing this glorious past. I mean, think about it.
That had been overshadowed for so long.
Yes. And this reawakening of their heritage, it must have instilled such a sense of pride.
It did. It really did. It empowered those reformers.
Yeah.
Finding strength and inspiration in your own roots.
Yeah.
Powerful motivator for change.
So powerful. It's like realizing you have this incredible legacy to draw upon.
Right. Absolutely.
But we also can't discount those internal factors. We can't forget about those.
Of course not.
Right. The burgeoning nationalist sentiments.
Yeah.
The changing economic landscape.
Yes.
The continued expansion of modern education within India. All of these things played crucial roles.
Absolutely. Each thread contributing to the larger picture.
It's like a complex tapestry.
It is. A complex tapestry.
Yeah. And our source material, it really dives deeper into this complexity. Particularly, there's this section called the PWO Unlius Edge.
Yes. The PWO Unlius Edge.
Can you explain what that is?
Yes, of course. That's a specific segment in our source material that focuses on these often overlooked political and social motivations behind these reform movements.
Oh.
It's really designed to offer a nuanced perspective, to help us really understand the complexities beyond just the surface level.
It's like peeling back another layer of the onion.
Exactly, peeling back that layer.
Right. So now that we've got a handle on the why,
Yes.
let's try to delve into the how.
Right.
What were these movements actually trying to achieve? What were their objectives?
Okay. So these movements, they wanted to transform things. They really wanted to address those flaws, those shortcomings we talked about earlier.
Right.
The rigid social hierarchies, the really bad state of women's rights.
And this is where it gets super relevant for our UPSC listeners out there. Right, because understanding these movements, it goes beyond just memorizing names and dates for your exam.
It does.
It really does.
It's about analyzing the interplay of social and religious and political factors, recognizing how they shaped India's trajectory, like connecting the dots.
Connecting those dots.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about the why, the context, the driving forces.
Yes.
Let's dig into the how. What were the specific objectives of these movements?
Okay.
What were they fighting for? What changes were they striving for?
Well, one key focus was challenging the rigid caste system.
Yeah.
Many reformers, they saw it as this major obstacle to social progress, to unity. They wanted to dismantle those hierarchies that were just so deeply entrenched in society.
So it wasn't just about, like, religious reform. It was about, like, social justice, equality as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this ties into another major objective, improving the status of women.
Okay.
Remember all those, grim realities we talked about? Right. Female infanticide, child marriage, no widow remarriage. I mean, they wanted to address those injustices head on.
So, like, advocating for women's education, property rights, overall empowerment.
Exactly. They recognized that, a society couldn't truly progress if half its population was held back.
Right. And let's not forget that a lot of these movements, they emphasized religious reform as well.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, they were really pushing back against what they saw as superstition, ritualistic excesses.
Yeah, like a more rational, more ethical interpretation of religion, you could say.
Exactly. So it's like they were striving for this, more rational and ethical interpretation of religion.
Exactly. Think of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, his efforts to combat sati.
Yeah.
Advocate for monotheism. He believed in a more reasoned approach to faith.
So they were trying to, like, purify, I guess, and revitalize religious practices, right? Aligning them with a more just and equitable society.
That's a great way to put it. You see this thread running through a lot of these movements, this desire to reconnect with, like, the core, the essence of their faith, but at the same time, discarding what they deemed harmful, outdated practices.
So while these movements shared, some of these overarching goals, did they also have distinct characteristics?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, what made each movement kind of unique?
Each movement had its own, nuances, little things here and there.
Right.
They were influenced by the regional context, the leadership figures, the specific issues they prioritized.
Yeah.
It's like having a national conversation, but with many different voices contributing.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure.
For our listeners who are trying to keep all these movements straight.
Okay. Take the Brahmo Samaj, founded by Raja Ram Mohan Roy.
Okay.
They're really focused on promoting monotheism and social reform, especially for women's rights.
Right.
And then you have the Arya Samaj, founded by Swami Dayanand Saraswati, and they placed a strong emphasis on Vedic authority.
Right.
Advocating for this return to the pure essence of Hinduism.
So, like, different approaches, different interpretations, but all kind of aiming for reform.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the Aligarh movement.
Right.
Led by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. This movement emphasized modern education for Muslims.
Okay.
And promoted a more rational interpretation of Islam within the context of, the British Raj.
So we see this, like, diversity of thought.
Yes.
And approach
yes.
within all of these different movements. It's so fascinating how they each contributed to this, broader picture
yes.
of social and religious reform in India.
Yes. And for our listeners, especially ones getting ready for the UPSC, understanding these individual movements, their key figures, their contributions, it's crucial.
Yeah.
It's all about recognizing those nuances within this larger wave of reform that really swept across 19th century India.
Now, it would be, too simple to just assume that all these movements were perfectly harmonious.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, surely there were disagreements, debates within this larger reform movement.
Of course. I mean, these were complex social issues, remember?
Right.
Different interpretations, different approaches, and just, the inherent challenges of navigating change.
Yeah.
It's only natural that there'd be debates, disagreements, even criticisms.
Right.
leveled against some of these reform efforts.
And I imagine navigating those changes within a colonial context.
Oh, absolutely.
Must have had another layer of complexity.
Absolutely. It wasn't just an internal struggle.
Right.
It was a struggle within a larger power dynamic.
Exactly.
Understanding these complexities, both within the movements themselves and within that larger socio-political landscape.
Okay.
It's so crucial for a nuanced understanding of this period.
So it's not just about memorizing names and dates.
Yeah.
It's about appreciating the dynamism.
Yes.
The debates.
The debates.
The long-lasting impact.
The impact.
Of these movements on Indian society.
And that's what we'll continue to explore in our final segment.
Yeah.
Stay with us as we dive deeper into, the legacies of these 19th century socio-religious movements.
Okay.
We'll examine what they achieved, where they may have fallen short, and how those echoes can still be heard in India today.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been, on quite a journey exploring the rise of all these socio-religious reform movements in 19th century India.
And now we're going to shift our focus in this final segment to their legacy.
Okay.
How did these movements actually shape modern India? How are they still relevant today?
It's fascinating, right? How these ideas, born out of that specific historical context, how they still have an influence.
They do.
On India's social and cultural landscape. And for our UPSC aspirants out there, this is where you can really start connecting those historical dots to contemporary India.
It's crucial. It's crucial.
Yeah. Which is a super important skill for those exams.
Absolutely. Recognizing those threads that connect the past to the present.
Yeah.
And one key area where we see this legacy is in education.
Oh, definitely.
Remember all those reformers who champion, modern, accessible education?
Yes.
They really laid the groundwork for the education system India has today.
It's incredible to think about. Think about, figures like Sir Syed Ahmed Khan.
Yes.
Emphasizing scientific and rational learning.
Revolutionary for their time.
Revolutionary for their time, absolutely.
And the focus on women's education.
Yes.
Spearheaded by individuals like Savitribai Phule, for example. I mean, it's had such a profound, lasting impact.
It's amazing.
On women's empowerment, on their participation in every aspect of life.
Absolutely.
It's a testament to the vision of those reformers that, those values, they're reflected in modern India's commitment to education for everyone.
It's almost like their efforts had this ripple effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Spreading outwards, shaping the future.
Yes, the ripple effect.
But it's not just about formal education,
right.
No, is it? These movements ignited this spirit.
A spirit of critical thinking.
Yes, right. They encouraged people to question those, old dogmas and challenge tradition.
And that questioning spirit is vital.
So vital.
For any society to grow and to adapt.
Exactly.
To the changing times.
And we see this reflected even today, right?
Yes.
In the contemporary debates around social justice, gender equality.
Even the interpretation of religious texts.
Yeah.
You see it everywhere.
So it's not just about specific laws.
No.
It's not about institution.
No.
It's about a shift, a mindset shift.
Absolutely.
A willingness to kind of challenge the status quo.
To engage in critical discourse.
Yeah. What a legacy.
It is.
And we can't forget how these movements, helped to shape a sense of Indian identity.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, distinct from the colonial influence.
Yes.
It was about rediscovering and reclaiming India's heritage, instilling that sense of pride and self-reliance.
Is that reawakening?
Yes.
Of India's glorious past.
We talked about before. It's almost like it fueled the nationalist movement.
It did. It really did.
Right. The very movement that led to India's independence.
They were precursors.
Yes.
Those socio-religious movements were precursors to that larger struggle.
They laid the groundwork.
They did. By fostering that social awareness, critical thinking, and that sense of collective identity.
Yeah.
Which are essential for any successful independence movement.
But, it's also important to acknowledge that these movements, the impact wasn't always uniform.
Yeah.
It wasn't always without its complexities. I mean, they weren't a magic bullet that solved every problem.
Of course not. No historical movement is ever that simple.
Yeah.
Some people argue that certain movements, even though they were progressive in their, intent, maybe they had limitations in their reach.
Yeah. Okay.
Or inclusivity.
So we have to ask those, those tough questions, right?
Okay.
Did they really reach all sections of society?
Yes, those are valid questions.
Or were they primarily confined to certain social groups? Did they, in trying to dismantle old divisions, inadvertently create new ones?
Those are the questions historians are still grappling with.
Right, and that's why it's so important to study history with a critical lens.
Absolutely, a critical lens.
We need to recognize both the achievements
and the limitations.
And the limitations of these movements, understanding them within that historical context.
Exactly.
It's not about glorifying the past. It's about understanding it.
Understanding it.
With all those complexities.
That's what makes history so fascinating.
So fascinating.
For our listeners, especially those preparing for the UPSC, this nuanced understanding is so important. It's about connecting those dots between the past and the present.
Yes.
And seeing how these events continue to shape India today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, here's our final thought to ponder.
Okay.
How do these 19th century socio-religious movements continue to have an influence on the social, political, and cultural landscape of India today?
That's a question to really think about.
It is.
To analyze critically, to engage with that rich and complex history of India.
And to help you on that journey of discovery, don't forget to check out the resources we provided in the show notes.
Yes.
The insert notes and UPSC daily current affairs are especially valuable for your UPSC preparation.
And if you've enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button.
Please subscribe.
Subscribe to the deep dive.
It really helps us reach other curious minds like yours.
It does.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring.